Good morning. Welcome and thank you so much for being here to celebrate International Day of People with Disability. We're very pleased this year to be celebrating International Day of People with Disability with our friends Purple Space and the valuable 500. And in this panel, focusing on personal leadership, I've asked our guests to reflect on their own experiences and to talk about what it means to be a leader and to help others to find their way to a more accessible and inclusive world. So with me today, I have Leonie Jackson, Executive Manager of Advocacy and Strategic Partnerships, the Deaf Society and Deaf Services Limited. I have Rodrigo, consultant at KPMG, and Marianne Diamond, General Manager of Participant Advocacy at the NDIA. So welcome to you. I'm pleased to be having this conversation. So I'm going to start off by asking, and Marianne, perhaps if I can start with you, to tell us about you and your work and what personal leadership means to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Happy to be here and to begin the conversation. So I'm a blind person, have been blind since birth. I grew up in a different era because I'm quite old, where it was pretty normal for a child with disability to go to a special segregated school. So from age 4, I lived at a residential school for blind children, and all I ever wanted to do was live at home with my family, like my brothers and sisters did. So that was a different time. I finished my education in mainstream school, somehow got to university, and I studied mathematics and information technology. I worked in that industry for quite a lot of time, had 4 children, one who is blind, and that changed my life. I thought I was a pretty good advocate and I could manage my life and had done quite well getting jobs and so on. But as a parent, I looked upon things differently. How do I navigate services for my child? What would be the best way to assist him and my family in a world that was very different to what I grew up in? So I kind of changed my career and moved to be part of the disability sector. My current role is participant advocate at the National Disability Insurance Agency, and that role was established earlier this year to get the voice of people with disabilities or our participants involved in as part of the design of new initiatives and systems, rather than just explaining to people what we've done, which then often, or not often, but sometimes didn't really take into account the perspective of people with disabilities. So that's exciting. And it's been a good year, difficult year, but as the NDIS, it's exciting, challenging and inspiring every day. So that's kind of who I am and what I do. My personal view on personal leadership is leadership isn't just in the workplace, leadership is in everything we do in our life, and we do a lot more in the leadership space than I think we often sit back and realise. I particularly say this to women, particularly mothers who, are managing a whole lot of stuff. But to me, it's about inspiring people, making people feel comfortable, bringing people along, taking responsibility for decisions I make. And of course, as a person with disability, I'm a role model. It brings its challenges. I find I have to spend a lot of time and energy making people feel comfortable about who I am rather than focusing on the fact that I'm blind. But I have enjoyed it, but as I say, it does take a lot of energy. And I would just end by saying, I think and often say my greatest contributions to leadership as a person with disability were the roles I played as a mother, whether it be on a childcare committee, a kindergarten committee, involved in my children's sporting groups. I was there because I was a mother. I wasn't there because I was a person with disability. And I find that has had the biggest impact.
Yes, thank you, Marianne. Lots of insights there. And Chris, what about you? Tell us about your work, about you, and what personal leadership means to you.
So I'm Chris. I am a lawyer working at KPMG, which is a pretty big place. It's very easy to get lost in a big institution such as that, the one that I'm aligned with or I'm a member of. I'm a financial services lawyer. I work a lot with major banks, and I write a lot of policy, do a lot of deeds of settlement, do a lot of policy, process improvement, all that sort of fun stuff. I feel that if I were to go further into the type of work I would do, a few of you would go to sleep. So I'll move on to maybe an explanation of what personal leadership means to me and how I've been able to develop a definition of it in response to how it's affected me. I feel that personal leadership, in terms of being someone who is born with a disability, in that being my optic atrophy, is about letting go, being brave enough, I suppose, or maybe a mixture of bravery and not really understanding what you're doing, but being able to let go of a lot of your baggage and understanding that it's your responsibility to be able to be honest and to be vulnerable, even at times when it is difficult personally to talk about particular experiences, because I know that there will be so many people here today that have their own stories of the baggage that's related to the way that they live their lives. And I know personal leadership to me manifests itself most clearly through to how honest I have to be in being able to look into the mirror personally and to understand that I'm going to give everything away. And I feel that it's something that inspires, but really I can't control how much it inspires other people. All I can control is how strong I am and how honest I am to myself to be able to make the commitment to be completely honest and vulnerable in the moment. So if there is one quality that I can extrapolate out of this, it is that personal leadership to me represents vulnerability and a desire to be able to be honest enough to yourself to be able to deliver your story in a manner that's unmitigated by the things that makes you feel strange, that makes you feel challenged, that makes you feel maybe at times a little bit forlorn, but you do that because somehow you believe it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Chris. I think you're speaking to really authentic leadership there, and it sounds like that's part of your lifelong commitment to authentic leadership. So I just wanted to say thank you and call that out. So Leonie, let's hear about you and your story and what personal leadership means to you.
Thank you. I really resonate with Marianne's comments in relation to being a mother. If I could just take a couple of steps back when I started my journey as a person with a disability and the ways in which I developed my own leadership within everything that I do. And I try to carry forward, those same traits. So I was luckily born to a very wonderful family who provided me with so much support. When they found out that I was diagnosed as to having a deafness, yes, they went through the initial stages of shock and grief, but both my parents were very, very adamant that they wanted me to have as many opportunities as I could, for me to lead the best life that I could, regardless of what I wanted to do. They were very courageous. They enabled me to do that, and they trusted in me. So they dealt with all of the doctors and the teachers and everyone saying that, Leonie may not be able to do X, Y, and Z, but they didn't take it on. And they often would say things like, don't expect her to achieve much at school and she'll be okay. She may finish year 10, but they didn't take that. They did not take that on. They knew that I could do more. And I think that it was because of the support that I had from my parents. They challenged the professionals on many occasions. And it's because of them that I am where I am now, because they provided me with so much support and so many opportunities. So in terms of schooling, there were a few options that were handed down to me from the medical professionals, etc., or the people from the services that we worked with. But as a family, they wanted more for me. So they've made certain decisions along the way. They did what they needed to do to make sure that I had the best access to services and education. And in some ways, it was like an early introduction for me to leadership. So, personal leadership, I watched my parents do that. They led me along the path, they advocated for me. So, that was my earliest exposure to leadership within the family environment. So, that was really important and really, really powerful. They did that without training, without qualifications. It was something that they did from instinct. So I'm here today because of my parents and the leadership that they demonstrated. So I've always felt like I now have the opportunity to contribute to the community in which I live because of the life that I led. So I became a teacher. I became a teacher of the deaf, and I studied teaching. Throughout university, I met many wonderful people. Throughout my work as a teacher, I met some amazing deaf people, and it really created a lovely sense of community where everyone believes in each other, having that strength network and that support network. I wanted to make sure that I had a community around me, and I wanted to make sure that I could provide other people with that sense of community and that sense of belonging. So I have two beautiful children now. My eldest son, we found out that he was born deaf. Like Marianne said, it was another role that I had to take on. So I stepped back and thought, yes, I can advocate for myself as a deaf person, but now I need to find that extra layer of advocacy where I need to advocate for my child, not only for him, but also for his friends and for everything that I do, all the work that I do now within the Deaf Society as well, is I advocate because I see that we have a responsibility to everyone within our network to make sure that we can all lead the life that we want to lead. And we can do advocacy comes in many shapes and forms, but mostly it's around making sure that we minimise the barriers that members of our community face.
Thank you. Thank you, Leonie. It's really interesting when you talk about that extra layer that I'm sure gives that extra energy that powers you along. It's the same for Marianne. I know from my experience that it's not unusual for people to make assumptions about people with disability and what they can and can't do. So, Marianne, can you tell us about the kind of assumptions that you've come across in your career, and what do you do?
Yeah, if I look back and think back to my time at school through my whole working career, it's a little bit different over the time. If I think back to my time at school, a bit like Leonie, assumptions were made by so-called experts in the field of blindness that I should leave school and be a telephone operator, or I wanted to study mathematics in year 12. I can't do that because I'm a female and I could fail, which shocked me. And my response was, well, I have a right to fail. I was fairly bolshy, so probably that helped. But people assumed I couldn't do or make the choices that others would make, which at the time inflamed me, but probably helped me in the long term become a fairly strong advocate. And I found even when I went to find a job, I had quite good marks at university. I did well, but I found huge barriers of assumptions that I couldn't do the job. So, of course, I moved to not telling anyone I had a disability until I fronted up for the interview, and then I had to do some fast talking because obviously I'm blind. When I front up, they know. But so I found that really challenging, and often it was about people's own experience with disability or lack thereof. I found that people who were more accepting and more willing to give me a go were people who had had a previous encounter with someone with a disability, whether it be in family or work. So I think I would say mostly people assume you can't do things, and sometimes really basic things. Even now, today, people still get really surprised, that I can chop vegetables. They kind of have this vision that I'm going to chop my fingers off every time I might chop a vegetable. But so people assume you can't do a lot, and then particularly in the workplace that you mightn't be able to. And I think for me, what do I do about it? I think I do put a lot of energy and effort into talking about myself, the person, not focusing on the disability, but weaving the how-to into the conversations and being willing and able to openly and talk about my disability. And I think Chris raised it in his comments earlier, and that is recognise my vulnerabilities, put them on the table. I've had many years of practice at that now, and it's worked quite well. And also being mindful of the people I'm speaking to, where they're coming from. Have they ever met a person with disability before? What should they know? What should they not know? I have found in the workplace, because now I've had lots of different jobs, done a lot of different things. I think my CV can talk a little bit for itself, which at the early years didn't exist at all. So I think it changes over time, and the audience you're talking to is a lot of it. But I am pretty much happy and willing always to let people ask me whatever they choose.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Marianne. A wealth of experience there. Gosh, that's for sure. And so, Chris, what about you? What kind of assumptions do you find that people make, and what do you do?
I feel that when you join a different environment, be it a new team or a new workplace or something to that effect, you can confront a situation where people feel that they've all of a sudden become an expert on whatever limitations it is that you have, and they can all of a sudden become an authority for how they can judge your performance as based upon how it could be compromised by the limitations that accompany a disability. I find that to be an extremely strange phenomenon, because in most situations, even I don't know how I will have to adjust how I do a job if it's in a new environment, a new project, a new team, or something like that. Despite my knowledge that I will only ever come to terms or properly understand how I need to adapt myself to a new environment in time, it's quite strange to think about how others can instantly cast these assumptions which, as the word describes, is something that is assumed as opposed to what is real. So it's interesting for me, because whilst I was a law student, I didn't actually come out about my disability. I made it very quiet. And it's quite interesting to see how you can hide it as well, and how that becomes quite unhealthy because you're scared of being a victim of those assumptions. So to go back to what I said earlier, it's about being brave enough to be vulnerable. Because the one thing, unfortunately, we have to do this is to be able to have that honest conversation about what can and can't be done, and what adjustments need to be made in order for you to feel most comfortable in whatever environment you are, be it professional, social, or others. So yeah, it comes back to people all of a sudden formulating some form of subject matter expertise when it comes to your limitations. I find that to be a strange phenomenon. It's definitely something that I feel has subconsciously influenced how I approach a lot of things in my life, where I tend to not assume and I try to listen and learn. Maybe that's because of these experiences. But yeah, assumptions are a strange thing in life, and it's definitely something that we can all relate to, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, thank you. I think that's fascinating, and that's the readiness of others to make a decision about what you can or can't do before you've even had a chance to consider it yourself. Um, you know, wow. Yeah, thank you for that, Leonie. Tell us, what kind of assumptions do people make about you and what you can and can't do, and how do you address those assumptions?
It's a bit the opposite to Chris's experience, I think. Because I've developed a very good lip reading skill and the ability to lip read, and I speak very well. So many people assume that, oh, she'll be fine. She doesn't need any support. Leonie can do X, Y, and Z, because I've managed to adapt, I've learned very quickly that I need to speak up and say, look, I'm sorry, I can't hear. Yes, I can lip read, but I can't hear what you're saying. And then people say, you know, oh, I'm sorry that you can't hear. And then I'll correct them and say, oh, you don't need to say sorry. And it's really about the language that people use and the language that you use back to them. So I'm not going to apologize for my disability. So therefore, why should you have to apologize for my disability? So I kind of role model the type of language that I want to see from the community. And we need to provide people with without a disability an opposing perspective on life. We have a very diverse community within the disability sector, and I think that's worth highlighting. Also, people assume that I don't need adjustments, but it's about educating them that there are some very minor adjustments that can be made. You need to make these adjustments so that people can fully participate within the community or within a meeting, for example. It's very disempowering when provisions aren't made, or people just think, oh, well, it's okay, Leonie doesn't need it. She'll be fine, she can cope without it. It's really important for people to see the struggle, for them to be able to make the changes and think about ways in which they can adapt so that everybody feels included. Sometimes I've noticed there are people that are hard of hearing, and because of the stigma attached to having a disability or a hearing loss or a hearing impairment, they're too ashamed to speak up. So they just struggle through it. Like Chris and Marianne said, it takes courage. It takes a lot of courage to stand there and speak up and say, look, I'm not coping in this environment and I need X, Y, and Z. If you speak up, generally the audience are very receptive and are very quick to make the adaptations that you need. It just takes courage. I think if we can establish this as, you know, speaking up as the new way forward, then it's going to be better for the entire community.
Yeah, thank you. That sort of leads me on to my next question, which is a question, I suppose, about the standards that we expect from organisations and about being accessible and inclusive for groups, but still respecting the individual needs of people. And so at the Australian Network on Disability, we really encourage organisations to not make any assumptions and to ask the person. But I'm also mindful that, you know, how do you feel about always being asked? Would you like to know what the, you know, should there be some standards that will be naturally inclusive of you? And is it exhausting always being asked? So really keen to hear your insights here, Marianne.
So I think organisations should recognise diversity, disability being one group in the diversity of people, you know, and some of these diverse groups interconnect too. You can be a person with disability who's a carer, who's an Indigenous person, and so on. So I do think there needs to be recognition and acceptance, and where possible, strategies in place for inclusion. However, I am really of the view that I know best what I need in the workplace, for example, to do my job, and I would rather be asked than wait for assumptions that may sometimes not be correct, which then makes your start in the workplace or your ongoing ability to do your job difficult. So I think there is that combination, Suzanne. I think we do need to have strategies. We need to recognise that the whole population is a diverse group. There's different groups within, and as Chris said earlier, or might have been Leonie, even within one type of disability, there's huge diversity as well. So I think, yes, organisations should make that, you know, message loud and clear that our population is, working population is diverse, but I think we should never take away the ability to ask me the question. And yes, it does get tiring sometimes that you're telling your story multiple times, although I still think I believe I'm the best person to tell my story than others to assume. That would be kind of my perspective on that one.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for that. What about you, Chris? what do you think the balance should be between asking the person or building systems that are accessible and inclusive for everyone?
I think I can speak to my own experiences of working in financial services, working in law, where as a professional, you often turn into a widget of sorts where whilst we're all human beings that go to the job as a human being, you're measured in terms of your output, your billable hours, all these sorts of indicia that become a part of who we are in the workplace. So it creates an environment where you are divorced from your ability to be perceived as being a human being that has emotions, that has limitations, that has peculiarities, and has special qualities. So, with that in mind, you can often be seen as being a product, and it's very difficult to come out with certain aspects that define your being. And I think it's really important to be able, as an employer, to create an environment where you can be inclusive, where you can allow someone to feel comfortable to speak with you candidly about what works for them and what does not work for them. I think it's as simple as showing that person that they aren't going to be discriminated against, that they're going to be judged by performance that is akin to or is equal to how the workplace can adjust to meet their needs. So whilst you will still be seen in a similar light to your colleague next to you, you will be your ability to perform at your peak level is accommodated because you are no longer that widget. You're allowed you're allowed to feel comfortable to divulge or to let your employer know about what works for you. So by showing that, so by creating an environment that is all inclusive, that tries to see you as a human being, you can then create the environment for that person to reach their peak performance and create those results that best suits the bottom line.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's quite insightful in that in quite competitive environments, of which many of our members have that very competitive environment, and it does take a certain boldness and courage to jump in there. So I certainly commend you for that. So Leonie, what about you in relation to this balance?
I prefer to be asked, I really do, rather than those assumptions being made. So there are times where organisations will invite me to participate in a meeting or to consult or whatever it may be, to work in some sort of strategic partnership with them. Yet they're not giving me with information about what is required. So I need to ask often because they're not asking me. So if I'm invited, I say, yes, thank you. And then nothing comes of it. Oh, I wait. And then I have to say again, well, okay, well, for me to participate, I need X, Y, and Z. I'll need an interpreter and I will need access to the minutes or the notes in prior, etc. So if you want me to be involved in your meeting or in your stuff, then you need to deal with my access requirements in an appropriate manner. And often they don't do that. So even within the disability itself, so there is, I guess, deafness as a disability cohort, but every one of those people that is either deaf or hard of hearing has different access requirements. There are those that prefer sign interpreters, those that prefer captions. So you need to make sure that you tailor your access or tailor the provisions to the individual. And if I'm not asked, then they're not going to know, but I absolutely prefer to be asked.
Yes, look, thank you. I think you've provided really valuable information for our audience today. And I'd like to finish off with one more question that comes from leadership and the journey that you're already on and treading in your various organisations, and hearing how you use that personal leadership. And so thinking about young people with disability just entering the workforce, what do you want young people with disability to know and to do as they start out on their career journey? Marianne, can I turn this to you? I think
yeah, Susan,
we're
a
paving
great
the
question.
way.
Yes, sorry.
You're paving the way for the future. What do you want to be young people to know and do?
So I think as we celebrate International Day of People with Disabilities, and I think, people with disabilities working is such a big part of what we want to achieve. People make decisions when they work and have economic information, contribute to economy and so on. I think I would say to many people who are young, which I did not have, try your hardest to get work experience while you're at school, when you're young, while you're at college, etc. Be clear and understand what your accessibility needs will be, or reasonable accommodations, so that you can have those conversations with the potential employer. Don't assume that they will just do it. They know what you need, because often they don't, as we've talked about earlier. So I think, having those conversations, being confident to have them, and go for it. Not every job you will ever get is the perfect job. Some will work and some will not, but that's all part of what develops you into the person you are and becomes. So I think courage, I think experience, I think being clear and understanding your own needs and what works for you is really important.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marianne. That point about work experience, we know from the data is so important. Chris, what do you want young people with disability entering the workforce to know and do? And I know you've already been helpful in giving your insights to the PACE mentees, for example.
Upon thinking about how to answer this, many years ago, a friend of mine gave me a quote from the Book of Proverbs, of all places. Now, I'm paraphrasing this quote to make it shorter, but you have to have the voice of a swallow and the mind of a serpent. And to explain that, we all know that we live in a society where we form a part of a minority group, for which there is a majority group that holds the power. So typically the minority gets swallowed by the majority, who rule the way that we can identify with them. What we're trying to do by being here today is to show you maybe ways of finding your place within the majority. Often different workplaces have certain cultures, certain expectations, certain ways of being. I know within my own experience in the world of work that I need to phrase and market my own disability to create some sort of acceptance by the whole. And this is why it comes back to personal leadership being a practice of being able to be comfortable with your vulnerability, or at least being able to deal with it. Because sometimes you have to give a little bit away in order to welcome and to compel others to support you. That is the mind of a serpent, because you need to be able to survive in a workplace where you're not prepared, or you're not naturally attuned to a dominant culture that is not used to handling you. So we ultimately want the best result for all of us, and you need to be able to speak their language in order to win their support and to be able to accommodate you. Because if you can do it successfully, they'll become your greatest champions. And you could really, from my own humble experiences, sort of create different awareness that not even you thought you could possibly do. It's kind of strange that you're the person doing it, because when you look into the mirror, you're just yourself. So yeah, it comes back to this quote that I heard about 10 years ago. I don't know if I've actually gone back and read the passage endlessly or anything, but it's something that's inspired how I tend to identify my own way of interacting with the wider world. You learn how to speak the language of the institution, and you learn how to use that to compel support, to win your own little fights, to be able to be judged in the same way as others do. So be brave enough to be yourself, but also understand that you are going in as a sole individual, a sole fighter into an army that can swallow you up if you don't know how to speak their language.
Wow, that's I just from the interactions that we've had, Chris, I feel that you've internalized and carry with you the swallow and the serpent in everything that you're doing. So yeah, that's beautifully said. Thank you. And Leonie, what about you? What do you want young people with disability just entering the workforce to know and do?
After Chris's comments, I'm just blown away. I don't know how to respond after that. That's really, really powerful, that message, Chris. It's given me some food for thought, surely. So I've had different roles within different workplaces. One thing that I developed was resilience. Now, you either have an ally or a change champion. You can have someone to work with you or assist the environment to change for you. So for young people, and Marianne and Chris have already touched on this, obviously you need to be courageous, but be yourself and don't be ashamed of your disability. Have the courage to show them the real you, and people will learn to see things from your point of view. And the one thing that I've really enjoyed is the fact that I've worked in a diverse environment. It's been so good for me, and I think everyone can learn from each other. So you can be your own ally, you can be your own champion within the workplace if you have the courage to do so. And you don't have to fight this fight on your own. Look for an ally, look for someone within the organisation who believes in you and can work with you. Don't think that, the world is against you. People don't know what they don't know. You have an opportunity to educate those that you work with. Once the adjustments are made and they're more familiar with you and they've been educated, then who's to say that there's not an opportunity for another person with a disability within that organisation once you have paved the way? So I think people can see you as an exciting opportunity. And absolutely, all of this takes courage, leadership, believing in yourself. And I find it really, really exciting when people see the real you. There are plenty of opportunities out there. We just need a little bit of support along the way.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think in talking about personal leadership, you've been so generous and so authentic in sharing your experiences and your insights. And a massive thank you. I really appreciate you being here. And I'm so pleased that many others will hear about this journey, and thousands of people will benefit from your words and your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you have